Grief is already so heavy, but what happens when grief carries something even heavier in it? Shame. So today we're diving into the silent but powerful role that shame plays in our grief. We'll talk about why it happens and, most importantly, how we can start releasing it. Shame is an often not spoken element of grief. So today, please follow along and know that this is a normal, natural element of grief and that there's actually nothing to be shameful about. I'm Jo McRogers, a grief therapist, and I want to welcome you to the Grievolution. Grief needs a revolution, and I believe that we can change how we do our grief. So let's dive into today's topic. Shame in grief is so common but rarely spoken about. Maybe many of you are familiar with Dr. Brené Brown. She's a leading expert on shame and vulnerability. And her research tells us that shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. These are some of the key elements of describing grief. Grief can isolate us, and this makes it the perfect breeding ground for shame. So why does shame creep into our grief? Well, first, there's the pressure to grieve correctly. Society often dictates how long or how deeply or how observed our grief should be. If we take too long, we might hear, oh, you're not over it yet. Or if we seem to be doing well, we might feel guilt for not grieving enough. So no matter where we land, shame whispers to us that we're doing it wrong. Secondly, there's the stigma around certain types of loss. Deaths through suicide, through overdose, or estrangement can carry social judgments. What do you mean you didn't speak to your mother for years? You must be so sad, she's died. Research tells us that these grievers experience what's called disenfranchised grief, and it's a term coined by Dr. Doka, and it's described as where the grief isn't fully recognized or validated. And this, again, fuels a sense of isolation and therefore shame. And the third source of shame is our own expectations. Our own expectations can turn against us. We might feel ashamed for crying too much at the checkout counter, or not at all at the funeral even. We might feel shame for moving forward too soon or for feeling stuck. If we regret things we said or did before our loved one's passing, shame can lock us into this place of self-blame, responsibility, culpability, and more shame. These are just a few of the sources of shame in grief, or the feeder pool to shame in grief. So, how do we start loosening shame's grip on our grief? First, speak it aloud. Shame cannot survive being spoken. Given space, being heard. Please find a safe space, whether it's with a trusted friend, a therapist, or a grief community. All of these opportunities to speak it can break shame's silence. Second, challenge the shoulds. There is no right way to grieve. Your grief is valid, however it is unfolding. Recognizing that shame is often rooted in unrealistic expectations, self or others, can help you rewrite your own rules, your own guidebook about how to do this. Third, please practice self-compassion. Dr. Neff is a self-compassion researcher, and she reminds us that her statistics say that speaking to ourselves with kindness, just as we would speak kindly to a friend, can counteract some of the harsh self-judgment that fuels shames. And finally, please find a connection. Grief can be so isolating, but shame makes it even more so. Joining a grief community, whether in person or online, reminds us that we are not alone, that our grief in all of its forms belongs, that it's normal and that it's natural. Shame does not have to be part of our grief. By bringing our shame into the light, we can begin to soften its hold and make space for something else, and that something else is healing and connection, even self-acceptance. So if this message resonated with you, let's begin this conversation. Please drop a comment below. Have you ever felt shame in your grief? How have you worked through it? Please support and inspire all of us, because we're better together. This is a conversation that needs to be explored. It needs more attention, it needs more time, and it needs to be spoken. So if this has resonated with you, please share this video, like and subscribe, so that you can know that your grief can be met without experiencing shame. And as you experiment with how to meet your grief, please, I send you kind thoughts, kind words, and a kind heart. Thank you so much for your time today. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.